Hi, and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javan, and today we are going to continue the fighting game series with the third installment of a potentially 4 or 5 part series. We're not sure yet. But I have with me today our resident fighting game expert, and yeah, we have Connor.
Hi, everyone. Connor, Bloodred Sakura. Find me on Twitch or find me at Digiprint, whichever you want.
Oh, you're shouting out the Digiprint this time. Nice.
Yeah, got to, or Naked Exile will get after me.
That's right.
He's the enforcer around these parts.
Yeah. And a potential candidate for a future episode, I'm thinking, for possibly Legend of Zelda or maybe even the 3D printing space. But that's...
you can also talk about Mario, too. That dude's a wizard.
Yeah. Anything Nintendo, he's basically got nailed down.
Yeah, the guy.
Yeah. But yeah, back to fighting games. Today, we've talked about in episode 1, if you haven't caught it, make sure you go and catch it because it lays the foundation and framework for a lot of what we're going to talk about. We talked about fighting games, their core mechanics, and some other satellite things to them. In the previous entry, which you don't technically need to listen to this one, but it might be helpful, is 2D fighters and their subgenres. And so our natural progression now is to talk about 3D fighters. So what is a 3D fighter?
So a 3D fighter is a fighting game where you can move around the arena, but the camera stays the characters stay locked on each other. So you can move into the background and the foreground on a 3D axis, but the camera is going to stay at a 2D plane. It will never shift over either player's shoulder, as it were, which is what differentiates a 3D fighting game from what's called an arena fighter.
Okay, so to recap just a little bit, in the 2D fighting games, you can move your character forward, you can move your character backward, which is away from the other character, so towards the other character,
Right.
Away from the other character. You can go up in the air, and you can go down and to a crouching position.
Crouch. Yep.
And now in the 3D fighter, what you're saying is that the character I'm controlling can come towards me as the player or away from me as the player.
Mm-hmm. And he can also sidestep in either direction. And in some 3D fighting games, also jump, and of course you can crouch.
Okay. So it adds that.
So
so if a fireball is coming at you,
another dimension.
Right, but if a fireball is coming at you, rather than having to jump over it or duck underneath it, you could just come towards you the player, and it would continue along the axis that it's going. And
yeah, so you would sidestep.
Okay.
And it will just, as long as the fireball travels on a one-dimensional plane, travels in one direction, you would just sidestep it, which is actually why 3D fighting games do not tend to have fireballs. It's not a big part of the game plan.
Because they're not very effective, I'm guessing.
Not very effective and hard to balance, right?
Okay.
So when you think of 3D fighting games, kind of 4 names come to mind, period. There have only been kind of 4 big 3D fighting games, and they've each had their own rise and fall. And I'll start with the biggest right now, which is Tekken.
Okay. Which was initially a 2D.
No.
No, it wasn't.
It's always been a 3D. But Tekken is unique in that sidestepping is spice in Tekken. You do it to really style on somebody, and when you know what you're doing. But other than that, you're playing in a much more 2D fixed plane, creating space between the two characters instead of doing a lot of stepping in arena positioning. It happens because it's available to players and they choose to express themselves that way. But when you're blocking and attacking, sidestepping is only relevant in very certain situations.
Okay. And then what are the other 3?
My personal favorite, Soul Calibur, which is unique in that it has the freest in-arena motion, and it's weapons based. The last 2 have no weapons in them to my knowledge, and Soul Calibur is completely weapons based. Every character has a sword, a shield, nunchucks, something. It's actually very strange for a character not to have a weapon. It has happened, but very unusual.
Cool.
That Soul Calibur is considered the anime 3D fighter because with the other versions, you can see punches, you can see kicks, you kind of know the general place you have to block and what you have to do. But Soul Calibur has its own framework of attacks that you have to learn that are different from Tekken Dead or Alive and Virtua Fighter.
Okay.
Which brings us to our next big name, which is Dead or Alive, the titty fighting game. If you know anything about Dead or Alive, it is about jiggle physics for some people. But there is a competent 3D fighting game underneath all them polygons. And how that game works is you have a constant triangle between, I think it's guard, throw, and hold, where holds will beat, I believe it's holds will beat throws, which are beaten by guards, which throws beat. And so you basically constantly have a counter system on your hand where you even on block, you can hold moves and then you will counter those moves. It's a pretty nutso game. I regret not getting further into it than I have.
Sidebar, I just heard the first geese of the season fly over.
Oof.
So
they're back.
No, they're leaving.
Nice. I'm so turned around. I've not lived in a place where birds leave or go in 2 years. It's been great. There are just birds all the time.
Yep. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to detract, but
you're good. The last one we have for 3D fighting games is Virtua Fighter, and you need a PhD to play Virtua Fighter.
Okay.
It is very in depth. It is very, very difficult to be good at, but the people that are good at it are insane. Of all these games listed, I've played the least amount of Virtua Fighter, but from what I've seen of it, it's insane. Like I look at it and I don't know what's going on.
Nice. That's pretty big for you.
Yeah, it's one of those little black boxes still left in the fighting game world for me.
Cool. So, well, let's talk a little bit about, is there any like big mechanical differences other than the sidestepping in these 3D fighters? All right,
Absolutely.
Let's talk about those.
So, in the previous episodes, we talked about how you guard low, adjust high.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite for 3D fighting games. Lows tend to be very slow or very low reward, one of the two, mm-hmm. or incredibly punishable. Whereas mids and highs, we'll start with mids. Mids hit you when you're crouching, and you can't block them when you're crouching, and are very fast and very safe and generally pretty good reward. Some 3D fighting games have the concept of a high, which will not hit you, which is what a whiff is. If you are ducking, those tend to grant incredible advantage or do incredible damage, because the downside is if it gets ducked, you're just standing in your opponent's face and can't do anything for a while.
Right.
So with that, you see that it's reversed from traditional fighters, where the low moves tend to be the unseeable, decent reward moves, and in 3D fighting games, the mids are the unseeable, decent reward.
You kind of need to like inversely rewire your brain to play these a little bit.
Kind of. Characters default to a standing state, so it becomes, because there's so much emphasis on motion, it becomes a lot easier to move around and naturally draws you towards that conclusion of I want to be moving at any given time. Because when in a 3D fighting game, if you're moving, you're creating options for yourself and presenting options to your opponent, right? They have to know the space that you can create at any given point and know that you have the ability to step forward, back, or either side at any point. And so it creates a lot of mind games in how you move. And because of that, blocking is generally either done automatically. Tekken has an auto block system where if you aren't pressing a button or a direction, your character will auto block mids instantly. So, and that actually comes up in how you move in that game, which is a really advanced topic.
I want to do a little sidebar here on a discussion. It's probably a little late in the series to bring it up, but it's something I want to bring up, and that is the concept of footsies.
Ooh, footsies. That's a good game.
Because, well, and not just the game itself, but
the concept.
The concept of footsies, because it sounds like it's of utmost importance in 3D fighters.
It depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
Because there's the mechanical concept of footsies, which is neutral game. It's when either player has an advantage throwing out moves that either are hard to deal with or limit your opponent's options, such a way that you can start to skew the game in your favor without really committing to anything, right? It's kind of the art of undercommitting
Okay.
for the highest reward. And then you have the fighting game community's concept of footsies, which is it's a cycle. Every game that comes out new that had a game that came out before it has dishonest, disingenuous, scummy neutral.
Okay.
And every game that came out before it is an honest footsies game.
Okay.
The pinnacle of clean sportsmanship.
Right.
Repeat for every game release.
Okay. And is a lot of that attributed to like in the first month of a release of a game, let's say, that people just don't have a good idea of what's going on for the most part, and so there is a lot of footsies that's happening and a lot of bullshit that's happening because of that.
Right. If you think about it in the context of a game, right? They look very similar to. It looks usually very similar to the game that you've spent 100 hours, 200 hours, 300 hours in, and have a very good understanding of how it works. But it doesn't work like that. Right. And so there's a sense of entitlement a lot of the times where you feel like you shouldn't be getting hit by a thing, but because you've never had to manage it in such a way, you do. And it's frustrating. And so instead of looking within themselves and finding the answers, people will just go, this game's for babies.
Okay.
This game's just got scummy neutral. It's bad.
Right.
And then next game comes out, same song and dance.
Interesting. So, I think we covered that a little bit. Let's talk about, I know that this is your absolute wheelhouse, so let's talk about Soul Calibur a little bit.
Oh, I love me some Soul Calibur.
What is Soul Calibur, and what makes it unique within the 3D fighting sphere?
So, Soul Calibur is a game about a boy who got very sad that he kills his father, so he kills the rest of Europe.
Okay.
And about a mom who wants to stop him. That's not his mom, just a mom. That is the overarching story in a nutshell of Soul Calibur. It's a tale of two swords eternally retold. Basically, you have a good sword and an evil sword, and they are kind of locked in this eternal struggle between each other, light side, dark side, yada yada. You've seen the tropes. And how it works mechanically is that you're put in an arena and you and your opponent can kind of, while facing each other, step in any direction with a lot of intentionality. There's not a very big mechanical barrier between you and moving your character, which, like its direct comparison, Tekken, because they're both made by Bandai Namco, has a pretty large barrier and went to move effectively. Soul Calibur, it's very easy to say, I want to go that way and then go that way. It's called the 8-way run system. And I mean, when it came out on the Dreamcast, it was revolutionary. There was nothing else like it. It was crazy because that was like at the beginnings of 3D motion, period.
Right.
And here's this game that puts you in a 3D fight, and it's a really good game still to this day, Soul Calibur 1.
Okay.
The other thing that differentiates Soul Calibur is how its button system works. So I'll set the baseline with Tekken. In Tekken, you have 4 attack buttons. Each one corresponds to a limb on your character. So you have a left punch, a right punch, a left kick, a right kick. And then combinations of those things give you various moves depending on your character, right? Okay. But the core 4 buttons holds true for every character. Soul Calibur has a horizontal button, a vertical button, a kick button, and a guard button. So 5 buttons.
Okay.
That's 5, right? I can count. That's 4.
Okay.
So what the game wants you to do with that, right, is hold guard to block. It's the best button in the game, trust me. But to attack, you have kicks, which are kind of short range, get off me buttons, or like finisher pokes. Like if they have a little bit of health, you can do a low kick and it'll kill them, right? Okay. Very fast, safe-ish buttons, right, for mashing. Then you have horizontals, which are used to control screen space. Your opponent can't step horizontals. They'll get hit. And the thing with horizontals that balances them is a lot of times they end up being high or having low reward. So if you duck a high, you get punished. Like you'll see it.
Okay.
It's not difficult to punish something you duck. It's called well rising punishing. It's a lot of fun, frankly. It's my main character is Nightmare, and he does it really well. It's really cool. Does a big uppercut and then a huge side slash with his sword. It's pretty sick.
Okay.
Then there's the vertical button, and the vertical button is there for your damage. You hit your opponent with vertical attacks when they fuck up. That's how that works. So all verticals are mids. So if you're crouching in somebody's face, you're gonna eat a vertical, and it's not gonna feel good. But because of that, verticals can be stepped. So if you're stepping, your opponent loses stepping consistently. Your opponent loses access to a lot of their high damage dealing moves without taking a major risk. They have to guess that you're going to stop or try to catch your step or do something strange, right? Do something that's probably not a good strategy. So there's a lot of mind games around walking around, how you're taking your movement actions, what you're poking with, things like that. And then you can subvert those mind games, which is where the real fun comes in of like, well, they did this horizontal high twice in a row. Are they going to do it the third? And can I get a sick read with a well rising punish here? Psych, they did a mid and I ate it.
Okay.
Soul Calibur also has an instant death mechanic. It's called a ring out.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. A lot of stages in Soul Calibur have a ring edge. And if you get knocked into the air or bounced off the ground, you can bounce out of the ring and it is an instant game loss and you'll go to the next game. So
you have to be
there's a lot of
where you are in the arena itself.
Screen position is very important.
Where your enemy is.
Right. In high level Calibur play, it is not uncommon to see somebody, if they, instead of taking an attack for their turn, quote unquote, they will just circle back to the middle. And it's kind of a direct comparison to like freestyle wrestling, which I did wrestling for a long time. And in freestyle wrestling, when I was doing it, if you were pushed out of the ring or left the ring for some reason, your opponent got a point. And so even if your opponent messed up, if your back was to the ring, generally the smarter idea was to circle back to be controlling the center of the ring, because then you could move forward against your opponent and you could put pressure on them to make them answer you. And that's Calibur neutral functions like that on some arenas. To go back to Nightmare, he has really big buttons that push you around a lot. And so you push somebody to the corner and force them to interact with you and make a gamble where you're a huge damage character. So if they're wrong, they eat a lot of damage or they get instantly wrung out.
Interesting. So that, I guess that would come into mind then when you're making character selection. If you want to play around that specific playstyle, you can.
Absolutely. There are a bunch of different like character archetypes from 2D to 3D. Don't generally transfer over. They have their own kind of archetypes, and they're not nearly as solidified as, say, a Shoto or a Zoner or a Grappler. There's a lot of characters do a lot of things. For instance, Soul Calibur specifically has Ivy, and Ivy is what's called a hybrid Grappler, in that she zones until you get close, and then when you get close, she'll throw you. Yeah, because she has fast, incredibly damaging throws. Some of which can't be broke at all.
That sounds like a really disgusting combo, to be honest.
Yeah, she's really good. She's good in every single game. She's not usually the best, but she is always a threat, and she's always high execution, which is the coolest part.
What do you mean by that, high execution?
So some characters are just harder to play than others. Their general game plan requires either harder combos, tighter inputs, more inputs, harder reads, things like that. And so usability is something, especially if you're playing in tournaments, that comes into play, where like some characters will be regarded as incredibly good on paper but not have very good tournament results, because if you're playing all day, are you familiar with decision fatigue?
Yeah, it's this idea of like you play 100 games of chess. In your 100th game, you've made so many decisions in the 99 previous games that you're just physically and mentally exhausted and unable to compute where you need to compute.
Right. Same thing applies to fighting games, because what you're doing in a match is a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're playing a comp or a difficult to play character with a lot of given options and a lot of things to consider on every hit, it's difficult to maintain a very high level of play through increasingly stressful situations throughout the course of a day. Add to that, there is a level of physical execution with Ivy that you need to be able to do. Her throw is like 9 inputs.
Wow.
Like it's a bunch of directional inputs and then 2 buttons basically. But you have to do them within a certain window and hide them from your opponent. So there's like also an element of mind games with that character. So like just playing her online is a lot of fun. You can pub stomp with her. It's great. You throw people to death. It's really cool. Playing her in a tournament is hard. Is really hard. But despite that, there are a couple really, really good Ivy players out there. They're just insane to me.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. But
the other
you
thing...
still do, to get back to your question, you still
yeah.
do have the concept of different play styles. Like you still have your all-arounders. You still have your grappler, quote unquote. They just take different forms, and their game plans are a little bit different, just based on the mechanics. Because in a lot of, we talked about the triangle in the first episode of strike, throw, block.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of exists, but in most 3D fighting games, Tekken and Soul Calibur specifically, you can break any throw in the game. It just depends on the input and the timing window you have to do it. So, for instance, in Tekken, every character has at least two types of throw. Traditional Tekken, I think 8 actually changes this. And then some have command throws. And you have a throw on left side punch and kick, and right side punch and kick. And the like you have to break that throw by inputting the punch that they did, basically. And there's a visual tell in Tekken where they will reach with the arm you have to break with. And then command throws, they will reach with both hands, and you have to break with both punches. And that's kind of the mix-up.
Okay.
But command throws are breakable. To my knowledge, I don't think Tekken has an unbreakable command throw, but I'm probably wrong. For Soul Calibur, you can throw people on... traditionally, it's been the horizontal button plus guard or the vertical button plus guard, and then they will play different animations, and your opponent has to guess which one you put in. And so the more you get thrown, the more you learn about what button they're throwing you with most often. So there's a little mix-up in there. 6 changes it up a little bit by making all throws A plus G, all normal throws, and a direction, which does the same thing. So you press any attack button plus a direction to break the throw. And they made the window wider. It's honestly a lot more approachable. I like it.
Okay.
But command grabs can then also be broken, except for Ivy. Ivy has an unblockable command grab, and the command grab that's hardest to break in the game. So her 2 main throws are basically unbreakable.
Nice. Yeah.
And she's not even the pure grappler. The pure grappler is Astaroth, and he gets none of that.
That's the guy with the big axe, right?
Yeah. It's the golem with the big axe.
I remember him from what the heck was it? Namco Museum, or basically it was basically Mario Party but Namco characters. It was really cool.
Yeah, I've heard of that game. You can play a kart racer with him in that game.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
that's pretty rad.
Got the Bowser syndrome.
I play him. Yep, I play him in most Soul Calibur games as well, just because it's fun to throw people, and his damage is insane.
Well, cool. Is there any other 3D fighters that are worth shouting out?
Not off the top of my head. Like, the big 3D fighting games are really hard to make, and so not a lot of them get made. All the ones that do are really established franchises, and even then they're dwindling.
Right.
Like DOA 6, I think, was the last one, and it didn't do super well commercially. And so we don't know if we're going to get a DOA 7 or whatever the next one is. Tekken, on the other hand, is the opposite, and is just the most successful fighting game right now. And Tekken 8 is coming out. So it's really a mixed bag. They're hard to make, so you don't get a lot of indie 3D fighting games.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do, a lot of times they're kind of like janky,
It's
just
like
because
it's like
it's
a proof
hard.
of, it's like a proof of concept more than anything.
Yeah, it's really hard to polish. Like if you consider a game like Soul Calibur or Tekken, they started making these characters in the early 2000s, 90s for Tekken. Like they've had console generations to refine their tech, and they started with some of the brightest minds in 3D game development to begin with, and it still has jank. Like Soul Calibur and Tekken are both famous for having really janky, wonky hitboxes. It tends to be consistent, but it's consistently janky, right?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a structured chaos, so to speak.
Yeah, like it's especially with Tekken, it's just kind of one of those you got to know that hits there. Like nothing would indicate to you that it should hit like that, but it does, and you have to deal with it because it's a feature, not a bug.
Right. Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to touch on with the 3D fighters in specific, or?
Yeah, Tekken players and the Tekken community is the wildest shit I have ever been involved with. They are insane.
Really?
All of the Tekken players. So, at a town that I lived at a while back, the Tekken locals was at a dude's woodworking shop, and
Really?
the dude was a woodworker by trade and had a shop, and he would on I think it was Saturdays, you'd bring a case of beer for the house, and a bunch of people would set up portable monitors or computer monitors and PS4s and just play Tekken until 2 a.m.
Wow.
It was the wild. I mean, they'd get in each other's faces. They'd be yelling and hooting and hollering, just going wild. And it's the same shit they do at tournaments. Like,
Interesting.
they're animals, man. They're a good time. Like, they'll get up and tell you you're trash to your face. So it really fosters a culture of show up and be good or shut up and sit down.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. They're good stuff. I mean, along with the rest of the community, but Tekken players just tend to be the wildest.
Yeah. They're like the oh god, I'm probably gonna get crucified for saying this. But they're like the NASCAR fans of the fight game community.
I wouldn't go that far. But they are rowdy.
Okay.
They are rowdy and they love their game.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I like a group that has a game that has a passionate following that really makes it more exciting sometimes to play and to be a part of.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We haven't even gotten into the betting culture around the FGC.
Yeah. So that's something that we're going to probably talk about in the next episode, which is going to revolve around the fight game community, a deeper dive into that, and then the tournament scene, and maybe how all of that came to be to start out with. So
I'll have to brush up on my history.
yeah, no, then I will try to do so as well, so I can ask good questions. But yeah, I think that'll be it for this episode. This was 3D Fighters. Again, thank you, Connor, Blood Red Sakura, for joining me. And we will catch you guys in the next episode. All right, bye.